Okay, the flow of people has slowed. We're still recording, so we're good to get started. Nancy O'Connor, I made you co-host because my internet has blipped a couple times this morning. So just in case I get cut off, you all can carry on without me. This morning, we wanted to circle back to some of those issues that we all talked about when we were doing that visioning last fall and talking about things that we could use some of that admin time just for running this group to address some of those smaller issues. So we wanted to circle back to some of the transportation stuff this morning. Both Rockingham Planning Commission and SRPC are Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or MPOs. That is our federal transportation planning hat. And we have some of our MPO staff with us this morning. They're going to start with a brief overview of federal transportation planning in general, what the MPO is, how it works. But then I think they're also going to spend a pretty decent chunk of time talking about electric vehicle charging, which came up on Taylor Caswell's call yesterday, as well as some updates on the Seacoast Regional Greenway project that a lot of people expressed interest in back in December, January. So by way of quick introduction, Dave Walker and Scott Bogle are transportation planners from RPC. Colin Lentz is SRPC's lead transportation planner. And I'm going to turn it over to them to jump into all things MPO.
Morning all. Dave, I guess I can kick it off if you want, and you can fill in the blanks. Dave and Scott have many years of much more experience than I do. But just to give the kind of thumbnail sketch of MPOs, any urbanized area with 50,000 people or more is designated as an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. That's a federal designation. What it essentially is an MPO is a forum for decision making to ensure that regional and local voices are accounted for in the investment of federal transportation dollars. So we want to make sure that Dover and Rollinsford both have a voice on the board of the MPO, and that the MPO is the municipalities, 18 in our case, and I forget the exact number in Rockingham's case.
27.
But okay, so we are SRPC is quite small, so that the voice and the forum for decision making is kind of one of the main parts. We don't strictly speaking have money that is our own. Unlike something like Boston, that is a large MPO, they have major political people on their board, and they're making decisions about millions and millions of dollars. But any MPO follows the standard kind of decision-making process that is set forward in federal law. So that's kind of the main thing. I think, to put it as briefly as possible in terms of the history, and there is a tie back to the NCAA championship that you all were just talking about. Part of the impetus for development of the MPOs comes from when the federal government was investing in the highway network and was putting them through people's backyards. And primarily that was in the backyards of people of color and low income folks who couldn't, for many reasons, voice their concerns in the process of decision making for where those highways were being put. So we have this big, beautiful, gleaming national highway network, and the people's voices were not heard in that process. And my graduate advisor, who is a graduate of Duke, when I told her when I started working at SRPC, she said, well, hey, I was there for that process. Apparently she was in amongst the muckety mucks as kind of an academic, and studying how people's voices were part of decision-making processes, was there when everyone said, hey, we need a way for those voices to be heard in the investment, in the process of deciding where dollars are invested. So just a tie back to the NCAA tournament. Dave or Scott, anything else
Yeah, sure.
worth adding there?
Yeah, I'll just add in, so we kind of have a couple of roles here in New Hampshire, one of which is a little bit different maybe than what the usual MPOs do. So as Colin was saying, we have the federal transportation legislation that sets out sort of our general rules of operation and our designation and that kind of thing. And as part of that, we're required to have a long range transportation plan, which is a 20+ year project specific planning document that kind of lays out what we expect to see happening in our region in the future and what transportation needs we've identified to address those changes that are occurring over time. In addition, we have a TIP, or Transportation Improvement Program, which is a 4-year short range document. These are the projects that are getting implemented in sort of the immediate future. So our current TIP is fiscal years 2021 to 2024. So, it's those projects that are, being engineered and designed and actively implemented sort of right now. And then, in New Hampshire, we also have the state tenure plan. And the system we have here sort of tries to marry both the federal and state processes together. So we have our long range plan and we have the TIP, and the tenure plan kind of sits right in the middle, with the state actually having control of that document. But as an MPO and also as an RPC, we have a couple roles there. As the RPC, we are designated by the state RSAs that we provide input to DOT on our priorities for putting into the tenure plan, or putting projects into the tenure plan. And so we play that role. And then the actual implementation of the tenure plan is through the transportation improvement programs, or the TIPs. So we kind of sit on both ends of that process, where we provide a lot of priority projects that are going into the tenure plan, and we facilitate the federal funding coming in and being applied and actually building those projects as they come out at the close end of in the current times here. So, in addition to that, we also provide a role with technical assistance to our communities. We do a lot of studies, a lot of both regional and local studies. So we look at like regional crash data and do analyses of crash types and locations. We look at congestion management and try to understand, where are the congested areas in the region and what can we do to try to minimize that. Those types of things. And those pretty much, I think Colin touched on the rest of it. Trying to think, and maybe the last piece that I would just say is that sort of a critical component of what we do is to make sure that the general public is involved in some way in the decision-making process. And that sort of echoes a lot of what Colin said, but just making sure that the communities and the people that live in them have a connection to the state DOT and to the Federal Department of Transportation as well through us. So.
And I guess for some context for other folks, when you guys are talking about if there are projects that go through all of these processes and into these plans, that's bigger than sort of the regular maintenance, filling pothole kind of things, but sort of beyond that, depending on the program, it can be a big range of things from trying to figure out, are we going to get an additional exit on the turnpike, to we're making lane widening or signalization changes, or complete streets improvements, to have some bike ped facilities, to really some things that are, equally vibrancy sort of things, trail projects, downtown improvements. You've got the 10-year plan that is sort of the standard, always available planning and funding process, but then some of the congestion mitigation things, the transportation alternatives program that works on a lot of walkable, bikeable transit kind of projects. There's a lot that goes through the through DOT, and pretty much anything that goes through DOT receives some sort of comment or compilation or support from the MPOs.
Yeah, essentially anything that's federally funded, any transportation project that's federally funded or is considered regionally significant. So turnpike projects, for instance, are funded with state turnpike dollars, but those are often large scale construction projects. So they're considered regionally significant. So anything that is, like I said, federally funded or regionally significant has to be in our transportation improvement program and in our long range plan. So that's sort of the connection there. And so that pretty much covers almost every transportation project in New Hampshire at this point.
And I don't think it's a perfect metaphor that I use, but I think of it a little bit like an assembly line. If you think of our long range plan, the state's 10-year plan, and the TIP, it's moving projects from idea to construction. It isn't a perfect metaphor because projects can jump to the head of the line, the like 4-year section, without going through all the other stuff. But if we have a project, I'm in the process of soliciting new projects to be added to our plan that are candidates for the 10-year plan that we would submit essentially a year from now to DOT. So that can be an intersection that needs a safety improvement, or a sidewalk, town's first sidewalk, or some other kind of construction project. Where the MPO really plays a role is applying regional priorities to the ranking of those projects. So I'll get a batch of, say I get a batch of 10 projects that are candidates to be submitted a year from now. The MPO, the municipalities, look at a range of criteria for ranking those projects, from how well the project will improve safety to whether it'll improve traffic flow, how it touches on transit, or local economic vibrancy, as you mentioned, James. So they can weight those criteria. They say we want to prioritize projects that improve the safety for non-motorized users, for instance. So any project that speaks to pedestrians and cyclists being safer in a downtown, that project will get a few more points in the ranking process. That's a very kind of whittled down version of the whole process. But that just applies to many different funding opportunities. The 10-year plan is just one. We have about in our region, SRPC, we have about $4.9 million to apply to new projects every 2 years when the 10-year plan gets updated, and each region gets their own sort of allocation. There's the transportation alternatives program, which is specific to bicycle and pedestrian, non-motorized stuff. And then there are a number of other programs where that decision-making process that we facilitate would play a role in how projects get funded. But don't need to get into the weeds too much yet.
Any other big picture sort of policy questions for these guys before we jump into some of the specifics? I'm not seeing any. So yeah, I guess last point to drive home, we both operate with our body of commissioners are the ones who are the official decision makers. for our policy committee. So if you don't know your planning commission commissioners and you want to sort of stay in the loop on some of those transportation projects, those might be good people to reach out to. They're all appointed by your governing body. And then we also both have technical advisory committees that are generally municipal staff or other appointees who have transportation related experience. But those are both sort of forums that are open and available to you. So yeah, Colin.
And just one thing on that, as I said, the MPO is the municipalities, and MPOs are political bodies, but the staff, Dave, myself, and Scott, we specifically do not lobby. We can advocate for specific things, but the municipalities are the voice of the MPO. So if there is for instance, where we just had crossover day, if there is a particular bill before the legislature that is really important for local economic development, that is important for any reason, your RPC commissioners are the ones who can request staff to send a letter on testimony or what have you. We operate at the behest of the commissioners. So that was just sort of, we are part of the political process in some ways, but we do not lobby in the same way that we don't operate the same way that New Hampshire Municipal Association, for instance, can go and speak on behalf of a bill. I can go and say our commissioners support Bill X, or strongly request that Bill X be denied or something like that, but we can't do more than that.
So
Sorry.
what was going to be up next? Scott, you were going to give an update on the Greenway, and Colin, you were going to talk about EV charging. So
Sure.
Which of you was going to jump in?
Happy to go in any order.
Scott, why don't we start with you?
All right.
Of course, Scott.
How do people feel about some visuals? Okay.
You should be able to share screen.
All right, great. Terrific. Are folks able to see this?
Yep.
Looks good.
All righty, great. So I'm Scott Bogle. I'm a transportation planner with Rockingham Planning Commission, and really for about 12 years now, we've been working on trying to get the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway built. And this is New Hampshire's section of the East Coast Greenway. And so appreciate an opportunity to tell you a little bit about this project. Let's see, I think that Stephanie and John, perhaps Ben, and Jennifer have all seen a variation of this presentation, but for some of you, this may be new. So the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway is New Hampshire's section of the East Coast Greenway, which is envisioned as a 3,000-mile long non-motorized multi-use path that will extend from the Canadian border up in Calais, Maine, all the way down to Key West. Connecting it often gets referred to as an urban Appalachian trail, essentially knitting together local and regional trail efforts all up and down the eastern seaboard. So here in New England, it is about a little over 40% completed off-road, another 27% or so that is in the pipeline, meaning that a project has been programmed, funding is available, and it's in some stage of engineering. Another 8% or so, the alignment has been identified and is in public ownership, and then almost another 25% where there's a gap and it's currently on road. So Here in New Hampshire, the rail trail portion of this is being built in 3 phases, all of which are, well, 2 of which are already in the 10-year plan, 1 of which is in design, 1 of which is in the draft 10-year plan that's currently being considered by the legislature. But the first phase of this from Hampton to Portsmouth, 9.6 miles, is currently in design. And it's projected to go to construction bid this fall. The second phase down in Seabrook, 2.4 miles, is in the 10-year plan for construction in 2030, with engineering beginning 2028, I believe. And then phase 3 in Hampton Falls in the southern part of Hampton was put forward in the 10-year plan funding round that we're nearing completion of, was put forward by the town of Hampton Falls and Hampton with letters of support from all of the other corridor communities. And that ended up as the top priority for the MPO region, for our MPO region, and is in that draft document and received strong support at the Gasset hearings. There is a chance that the Seabrook section can be constructed in a more accelerated way. The town and the Rail Trail Friends Group in Seabrook have gotten commitments of funding and materials and equipment and labor from developers of a major retail project on Route 1. But the town is still working with the Department of Transportation on the trail management agreement that will be necessary for that. Similarly, with regard to the marsh section, the goal is to get this onto the 10-year plan and then develop a private capital campaign to see if we can generate a significant share, say 20 to 30% of the total cost privately, that would entice the department to accelerate that project and move it up in the 10-year plan, so that we're not looking at 10 years from now by the time that could be constructed. A lot of RPC's work since getting that phase 3 into the draft 10-year plan, work in the past 9 to 12 months is focused on thinking about trailheads and amenities and developing a nonprofit organization that will advocate for trail development. Last year, we did this analysis of all of the road crossings of the Hampton Branch Rail Corridor between Portsmouth and Seabrook, looking at which ones had adjacent public land and therefore potential for trailheads with parking. Identified 10 of those crossings with adjacent public land or private land where there was potential to come up with a cooperative agreement where you could have trailhead access with parking. Another 7 that have walk-on potential, and then 6 that usually, because of either private property or separated grades, there really wasn't access potential there. This year, we were able to get a technical assistance grant from the National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. So we have a team of 3 staff from National Park Service that are working with us, and we have 3 different work groups going. One of those is meeting with municipal officials currently as a first stage in developing a plan for community connections in each of the corridor communities. What are destinations in town or in the city, in Portsmouth's case, that that communities want to connect to the trail as a spine route, whether those are other trail networks in town, downtown business districts, pocket neighborhoods, parks. So that group is meeting with municipal officials now, gathering information, and we expect to do a pair of community charrettes during the summer to get additional public input on that. And I think we have some pro bono assistance lined up from a group of landscape architects locally who will help us with that. That group is also looking at conceptual designs for several trailheads along the corridor. Right now, there's funding in the federally funded project to design and build the trail, to complete the trail itself, but not to complete trailheads. And so that's something that we're looking for additional resources to get built. We have a separate group working on a trail signage plan, including wayfinding to help guide people to and from the trail to other destinations and communities. And then have a third group that is working on standing up a new regional nonprofit group, the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Alliance, that will, one of their main roles will be recruiting and training and organizing volunteers that will help with trail maintenance in each of the corridor communities. Also funding development and in the long-term promotion of the trail. We're very focused on the economic development potential of this trail and trails in general, and have had a good conversation about that with the chambers, both Portsmouth and Hampton, as well as Stephanie Berdile and Teresa Pinto, and Jennifer and Laurel at REDC. The trail is listed on Rockingham SEDS, but there's been a lot of research done on economic impact of rail trails around the country. Quite a bit of that done by the Rails to Trails Conservancy. And there was actually just a study completed as part of the update to the State Rail Trail Plan by UNH Cooperative Extension. UNH Cooperative Extension found average trail user spending by residents of about $26 per day. Average trail user spending by visitors who didn't live in the communities immediately surrounding the trail, up in the neighborhood of $40+ per day. This is a little bit above numbers that have been found by the Rails to Trails Conservancy. They've done an extensive series of economic impact studies for trails down in the mid-Atlantic and in New York State that found average trail user spending in the neighborhood of $15 to $18 per day. Although those were, some of those are a number of years old. So just a few snapshots of economic impact from trails and more broadly bicycling and walking. A number of years ago, State of Maine did economic impact study for bicycle tourism and found a total annual economic impact of about $65 million a year. There's also been research looking at, aside from trail user spending, impacts of trails and proximity to trails on housing values. For example, a study of the Nashua River Rail Trail and the Minuteman Rail Trail in Massachusetts found that proximity to a rail trail tended to increase or speed up the time that houses that were for sale spent on the market. Looking at two other analogous trails, the Virginia Creeper Trail and the Heritage Rail Trail, we looked at a series of trails that we felt were analogous around the East Coast, looking at trail length, looking at proximity to major metro areas, and therefore a large potential visitor pool, and found economic impact, in the neighborhood of $2.5 to $3.5 million per year, looking at visitation of 130 to 350,000 trail users per year. The Cape Cod Rail Trail that many of you are probably familiar with has over 400,000 visitor days, visitors per year. So just a snapshot of economic impact studies that have been done to date. And just a bit about next steps. over the coming year, we'll be continuing to work with the National Park Service Group on those 3 projects that I noted, working with corridor communities on trailhead development, providing input to DOT on the design of the Hampton to Portsmouth segment. We're starting to work with the New Hampshire Coastal Program on design for rehabilitation of the causeway through Hampton Marsh for that phase 3 project, and then pursuing funding to accelerate trail development. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Scott? Quiet group this morning. Yeah, Scott, I guess I'll ask or throw out sort of a general one. We had talked about earlier this year both the Seacoast Regional Greenway project itself as something that seems great for the greater Seacoast region, but also as something that if that's sort of your regional arterial and you've got a connected network of smaller trails, so you can use it maybe to get across the bay or to get around to different communities down along the seacoast. I guess how would you think about approaching that bigger question of sort of regional networks getting started in a way that other communities can leverage or tie into that effort?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. Pre-COVID, we had done some work with Southeast Land Trust, and then Jeff Latimer from Gus's Bike Shop in Northampton had pulled together a group that was looking to inventory small networks of single track trail on conservation land in the corridor communities, and then identify how those usually smallish, self-contained networks of bicycling trail could be connected into the rail trail as a spine route. In terms of broader regional connections, we're thinking about, for example, how could the East Coast Greenway be connected over to Rockingham Junction in Newfields to meet the eastern terminus of the Rockingham Recreation Trail. To me, an ideal scenario for that would be if the sale of Pan Am Railways goes through to CSX. CSX has some history of allowing rail with trail in other parts of the country, such that in theory, we could do a rail with trail connection from Rockingham Junction on the Portsmouth branch across over to meet the Greenway. That would be far from assured. I think CSX doesn't love doing those rail with trail projects, but they have done them in a number of places. Another possibility would be connecting across via utility rights of way. And then in terms of other community connections, that's really the focus of one of those 3 projects with the Park Service Group, asking municipal staff what their goals are for connections from the trail to other destinations in towns, as well as to other bike routes.
Ben first and then Charlie.
Yeah, good morning, Scott. Good to see you. We've had a couple conversations about this, but I'm just curious if anything's changed. What is the best way? Because we have some major employers that are right near this. I'm thinking Highliner Foods. I'm thinking the hospital. There's like thousands of people there. What is an appropriate way for the business community to be involved in this project now, and how can they be supportive of it and just play a role?
That's a good question. We should, we've talked down in Hampton with John about coming out and doing a presentation for his membership, and something like that in Portsmouth. We'd love to do if that's something that you could help us set up. To date, we've not done explicit outreach to major employers of that sort. We have done presentations for Rotary clubs and so forth. I think it would be ideal if we can get reps from those employers to participate in the charrettes and potentially go and meet individually with them if you'd be able to help us establish contacts in a couple of them. I used to have contacts at Highliner when I was involved with the United Way years ago, but don't any longer. But would love to do some brainstorming on that with you.
Yeah, we'd be happy to help facilitate presentations or other charrette involvement, however you would like the business community to be involved. We're happy to, be a partner in that.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
Charlie?
Yeah, Scott. Yeah, first of all, I just want to say I really applaud the work that you're doing. This is really important. I think it's one of the big opportunities as we recover. I would say one opportunity, and I think Ben, your question nicely teased this up, is really to build out those trailside services and build that connectivity to downtowns. I'm not going to say we're the only entity that does this. I think a lot of entities are, but we have a program in extension called Downtowns and Trails. And really the goal is to engage various constituents in the community to build that connectivity, whether it's through better wayfinding, cross promotion, or other activities. Would be happy to work with you and others around the state. We're doing this work in Keene right now. But I think it's a real opportunity, because what we find is that and some of the work that you cited, Scott, that Shannon Rogers is doing about the economic impact, is that communities don't make those linkages. They don't have good wayfinding, and there's not a cross connection between the natural amenities in the downtown. So I think it's a ripe area, but really appreciate the work you're doing.
And so others know I'm hoping we can revisit the concept that RPC had talked about with Charlie and Shannon to actually work with Cooperative Extension on that sort of outreach work, a next stage of that outreach work with communities following the end of our Park Service project. We had been scoping out a potential project for a recent round of Economic Development Administration tourism development funding, and I think just ran out of time to pull that project together, but hoping that we can pursue that in a future round.
Looking forward to it.
Scott, I guess thinking about those figures that you cited about how much people on these trails typically spend, depending on whether they're locals on the trail, visitors from outside the immediate region. I guess I'm wondering, is there information about the type of things they're spending on? Because it strikes me that somebody who's out for a ride is more likely to be spending that money on things like entertainment, food, the type of support for a lot of businesses that we've been talking about for years at this point, about trying to find a way to support them through COVID and recover from COVID. It seems like sort of that trail related tourism revenue is something that's really feeding right into that market.
Yeah, I think that the study that Dr. Shannon Rogers did for the state rail trail plan broke out spending into 6 or 7 different categories. I don't recall the breakdown currently. I've only seen a draft of the report that Mark Dabowski from GPI, who's the project manager for the state rail trail plan as a whole, had sent. I'm not sure that has that the final study has been published.
Yeah, no.
Is that available publicly yet, Charlie?
No, I think she's waiting for feedback from GPI and from DOT before finalizing it, but I think it's pretty close. So,
but certainly we can share that with the group once that's available.
That would be great.
Certainly,
Questions?
visitors, you have lodging as well as meals. And I think that those lodging numbers are what pushes up the
Gotcha.
the difference between the residents and the visitors.
Other questions for Scott? Seeing
Thank
none,
I'll just
Colin?
add one,
Oh,
sorry. I'll just add one tiny thing to this. In terms of trails being a draw for outside visitors coming and spending dollars. But I also see a big benefit in community to community connectivity for local residents. One example we're working on between it's technically called the Farmington Recreation Trail. It goes between Farmington and Rochester. It enters pretty much into Rochester's downtown, goes through some really nice parks, and we're working on getting that connected directly to Farmington's downtown. Rochester is, both communities are in a really strong revitalization phase, and I see a huge benefit in completing that trail, which is currently very multimodal. A lot of snowmobile clubs use it, but also for biking and walking. So see a lot of connectivity potential there. The Cotton Valley Rail Trail between Wakefield and Wolfboro is another good example. I know that's really heavily used, and they're just really nice and nice to connect communities. So anyway,
yeah,
on
that's
to EV.
really good point. I jumped right to talking about the economic benefits, but we certainly talk about this as a safe transportation corridor, a linear park, and while it is a national trail, really the bulk of the benefits that communities realize, I think, are as an amenity for residents. So it's
Yeah.
as well as a national trail.
And I think if you're talking about local residents using that, you can't, maybe it's harder to make a tie to direct spending, but I see a lot of interest brewing in Rochester and Farmington in terms of creating a community that is walkable, which lends itself to just a vibrant downtown. And if you can connect two of those together, it's like, hey, we live in Rochester, but we want to take a little ride our bikes up to Farmington or vice versa and grab a bite to eat and go back. I just see a lot of potential there.
Mhm.
So,
Great. So shifting gears to electric vehicles.
yes. I don't have any slides. This is all still new. You've probably heard some pieces of it. The bipartisan infrastructure law, BIL, includes $17 million coming to New Hampshire for electric vehicle charging to be distributed over the next 5 years or so. New Hampshire Department of Transportation is in the lead on that. They need to develop a plan for those dollars by August 1st. That will be approved by the federal government, a month and a half after that. And theoretically, the funding for that will start flowing mid-fall. So the general emphasis from the federal government is on building out a network of DC fast chargers along the interstates and major designated routes. Really briefly, in terms of EV charging, level 1, so-called, is basically just a 3-prong outlet that anyone has in their home. It's a trickle charge and is kind of the first step. Level 2 will take 6 to 8 hours to charge your average EV at this point fully, and DC fast charging will do a car in a half an hour. and kind of an exponential growth in the cost that it takes to put one of those in. So DC fast charging is pretty expensive. It's a lot of voltage. But that is what the federal emphasis is on, is developing that highway charging network, I believe, to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles, to make it easier for someone to get in their electric vehicle and not worry that they're going to be able to charge where they're going. So I actually don't know about the Rockingham region, but in the Strafford region, the Spalding Turnpike, or 16, and US 4 are both designated corridors for that would be getting some of that funding and be sort of near the top of the list. As I said, the first phase emphasis is on DC fast charging, and a corridor will be considered built out if it has at least DC fast charging stations no more than 50 miles apart and no more than 1 travel mile from the highway. So for instance, in our region in Somersworth, there's a Chevy dealership that has a DC fast charger that is a mile as the crow flies from 16, but it is not a driving mile from the highway. It's more like 2.5 miles. So that wouldn't count in that case, but that's getting us closer. Everyone is kind of learning as we go. At least I'm not an expert in electricity, but learning pretty quick about what it means in the transportation world. We're at SRPC, we're in the process of collecting as many potential sites as we can, with the idea of focusing on permittability. If we had the funding tomorrow, where could you get a permit the next day? So we're looking at municipal sites, commercial sites like a Hannaford or a larger commercial area, where you have a lot of people parking regularly, large employers where you have people sitting for a whole workday, or people stopping to get a coffee or a bite to eat. We are considering that emphasis on DC fast charging, but I also see a lot, arguably even better bang for the buck in that kind of level 2 sphere. Some people have referred to that as destination charging, in a place where tourism is such a big deal. I see a lot of value in putting chargers in a downtown where you want people to come plug in their car for 4 hours and walk around, grab lunch, see the sights, that sort of thing. Or if it's a small business, hypothetically a B&B, you don't need a DC fast charger at a bed and breakfast where someone's going to come up, plug in for the night, have breakfast, and then go, and their car is going to be juiced up and ready for wherever their next destination is. That's just thinking long term, and a lot of communities I've talked to are probably thinking along those lines, at least the smaller ones. But still a lot of good need for a place for a quick charge. So that's federal dollars. We are seeing already private interest in these charging stations. Rochester just approved a variance for a site along Route 11 for a kind of gas station style charging site that is DC fast charging. So there is private interest in it, and that's right on the way to the lakes. So your average car, if you can afford a Tesla, the high end models have like 400 miles of range, so that can probably get you comfortably from Boston to Lake Winnipesaukee without starting to sweat over how many miles you have left. But that's sort of midway point to something like Conway. So we're all trying to think strategically about where charging will do the most good. And I see two prongs that I've kind of danced around this thing that I'm thinking of. There's the network charging, but then there's the community charging, where network charging is great for kind of national and regional benefits or statewide benefits. But there's also the economic benefit of having chargers in your downtown strategically near your small business community, a recreation site. Just one off the top of my head, I saw value for the park off of Dover Point near Newix. If someone is on their way up and wants to stop and just kind of stroll around the park and then stroll along over to Newix while their car charges up, and then wherever they're headed next. So I'll stop there. I don't want to get too much into it.
So, yeah, Colin, Commissioner Caswell was talking about this yesterday as well, and I brought up the metaphor that we've sort of been throwing around in the office of, there's the gas station model. You go to the place, you charge your car, you keep driving, and the riding and grazing a horse kind of model. You ride for a bit, you're at a place where you happen to be able to plug in, you charge up while you can, but then you keep going, and maybe you charge 2 or 3 times during the day and then boost it the rest of the way like your cell phone overnight while you're sleeping. So it seems like there is definitely energy and momentum behind building out sort of the gas station, eliminate range anxiety, support people who are doing long distance traveling. And then that, if that network is successful in terms of supporting those people, making them feel like they can come to New Hampshire without, running out of electricity, that would be something that would help speed adoption of electric vehicles and would make sort of that local community centered type of network that you talked about more important, I guess. Is that fair to say?
Yes. And I'll mention one other thing. I saw Ben, your hand go up. But in terms of barriers to adoption, I mentioned that DC fast chargers are pretty expensive because that is big, thick copper cable. That is a lot of energy. And the federal criteria are you need 4 DC fast chargers at a site for it to count. Basically, they want or 2 chargers that have 2 cables, so you can do 4 cars at once. Because EV adoption is accelerating, and they are becoming more accessible to your average car buyer. But the thing we've talked about with particularly folks at Clean Energy New Hampshire, you may have heard of demand charges. The electricity is not free, and if hypothetically you're talking about in the middle of the summer in a small community where you have large employers and everyone's running their AC units, and you have a lot of demand for electricity in the middle of the day, and then 4 people show up and start charging up at a DC fast charger, that is a lot of volts, and that will immediately put you into these demand charges, which basically triple the electric rate or the cost in most cases. That's kind of the stumbling block. And currently, for instance, I went and charged up. We went and visited my mom's parents. I did it I charged up in the middle of the night in their little town, so that didn't really happen to me. But in most cases, it is probably the town eating that demand rate charge and not passing it on to the user. So that's one of the stumbling blocks. Someone has to pay for it, and either it's the person charging, or the employer, or the business, or the municipality. So folks are working on that. Eversource proposed a different rate structure for demand charges that's being looked at by the Public Utilities Commission. And theoretically, as more people adopt electric vehicles and we get more solar and the network adapts, those demand charges will diminish and go away. That's the theory. But it's still in its early stage. It's a lot of demand on the electricity network that is all demand based. There is no electricity storage in the grid currently to speak of. Electricity gets made and used almost instantaneously, and there's no real middle ground. So
Okay.
Getting into the details, I'll go to someone else.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously something we've been talking about a lot in Portsmouth. And not that this has been adopted by council or I speak with any sort of authority whatsoever, but we've kind of said that we're hoping the private market takes care of the level 3 chargers, you know, with those dedicated stations. I think there's one being built in actually Walmart in Rochester or Somersworth, I forget which now, but as a community for like our parking lots and things like that, we're redoing a parking lot right now. We're putting all the conduit and things like that in place so that we can add some stations down the road. And we're looking at, you know, adding level 2 chargers whenever we can, just so that people can come, they can go downtown, they can shop, they can go out to lunch, whatever have you, and charge their vehicle while they do that. We just think the level 3 chargers are probably too big are not really the right fit for our downtown, and we'd like to see that in the private sector. So that's kind of where our conversations have gone locally.
Yeah, I think Portsmouth has the greatest concentration of public kind of level 2 chargers in the general Seacoast region that I've seen, looking at the various apps. Just speaking hypothetically as not really an electricity professional, but just sort of a long-term planner, I see technology getting better as the electric vehicle technology and battery technology gets better. I think there will be less of a need for that gas station model where folks will be able to just get to their destination, or, you know, this is really high-end stuff, but there are already transit companies in other countries that have induction chargers where they just roll up over a plate, kind of like you've seen the wireless charging technology for cell phones. Just scale that up for a bus. There are already people, you know, experimenting with that. So I think this technology for it to work, it has to get better. It's already, you know, okay, but I see that gas station model kind of going by the wayside in relatively short history.
I know we're coming up
But
on
the name of
10
the game-
o'clock, but you know, if there are maybe 1 or 2 more questions for Colin, we can fit them in. Anybody?
I'll just note, I'm trying to put together a little panel discussion for one of our meetings, one of our MPO, I think our policy board, on the kind of permitting side of things. So what is the permitting sphere really look like as far as how do you regulate this stuff? Where do you put chargers? Dover put theirs in their site plan regulations kind of tied to parking. Other folks have done different things, and other folks like Rochester doesn't. I don't think they have anything official on the books, but they went through with a variance. So we want to start talking about that side of things for the long term, as this stuff kind of gets woven into the fabric here. So James, you can send that out to the whole crew
Yeah, if
here
you've got
once I get set
examples
up.
you want to send me to, Darren also sent me how Exeter worked EV charging language into both their site and sub regulations. So I'm happy to send those around with the call notes as well. Any other questions for Colin? Robin?
No, I just offer real quick, being from San Diego, I think the Southwest is a great example, obviously, for us in this part of the country. In San Diego, Walmart is the primary charging stations and has been for many years. And what they've done is built solar panels over their parking lot to create shade parking, which you really need in San Diego. And those solar panels are fueling their charging stations. So obviously, you have a lot of great national examples that have been enormously successful for many years.
And that's the other side of the coin that I want to include in my little panel discussion is the local generation. I know the Oyster River Middle School in Durham, they did the canopy parking with the solar panels. Farmington has 2 very large sites that they put in solar generation that, for various reasons, the sites weren't available for traditional development. So communities are kind of investing in the technical term is distributed generation. So we don't have one big power plant off in the middle of nowhere that's supplying everything. And if that gets knocked out, we're toast. The supply of electricity will be distributed over the region. I hope very soon at a large scale, so that, you know, if we have an outage somewhere, that the network is redundant, and, you know, your car can charge up while it's parked for free on the sun is the ultimate goal, right? So yeah, Robin, you're right. More folks are doing that.
Final thoughts, comments, questions for Colin? All right, seeing none, thank you all for your time. Next week, I think SRPC was hoping to check in one more time about some of our SUD stuff, but after that, I don't really have any other agenda items scheduled for the end of April. So if you've got thoughts or things you want to talk about, or you want some more time to just keep a conversation going on one of these topics our speakers have been bringing up, let me know, and we will start planning those. Thank you to Colin and Scott and Dave for being here, and thank you all for your time. Have a great week.
Thanks,
Nice to chat
James.
with you all.
Thank you.
James,
Yep.
I can't remember if you've done this already, but I'm happy to come back maybe with someone a little bit more gravitas about the BIL funding opportunities coming up. If folks are interested in trails, you know, the TAP program got doubled under the BIL. There's the rec trail program that has a set aside from TAP.
Is it, you mentioned letters of interest, is it too late to get on the TAP?
Not too late because they haven't started. I anticipate TAP a round happening for that sometime in 2023. CMAC is up
Gotcha.
next. The rec trail program just kind of wrapped up, so they're starting from scratch. That's an annual program, and that's for like smaller scale stuff. Rollinsford was interested in improving one of their local trails. That's just, you know, an off-road
So
unapproved thing.
I guess I was just extrapolating because you were talking about Farmington hadn't gotten you a letter of interest for their TAP project, but was that you were talking about a prior round?
That was in the prior round, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'm happy to come talk if folks are interested in just the funding opportunities. I can do my best to talk about the traditional transportation programs, which can definitely overlap with economic development.
Yeah, I think if there are things that are coming up that they should start pulling together,
Yeah,
that might be good to share.
yeah. Even CMAC isn't a stretch to talk about, you know, changing the traffic patterns in your downtown to be more pedestrian friendly, and those have congestion benefits. So yeah, just let me know if you have an open agenda and want something to talk about.
Okay, I'm not sure if you were on the call when we introduced him. Mikhail is our new Mark LaLiberty, our regional BPA.
Okay. Nice to meet you, Mikhail.
So
Nice to meet you as well, Colin. Thank you. I had a follow-up for James on a separate topic though.
Right. I'll see you then.
Thanks, Colin. All right, bye.